Good afternoon. Today is May 17th, 2017. This is a special meeting of the Citizens Finance Advisory Committee for the City of Morro Bay. Special in the sense that it's a reschedule from yesterday's regularly third Tuesday meeting due to the Amgen Tour Stage 3 being held in town. So thank you, those in the audience, for participating. We have a quorum present. All 7 members are in attendance. And so I will ask for a moment of silence, and then we will do the pledge. Okay, let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I'll open it up to public comment for anything not on the agenda. And the agenda is some of it is a continuation from last meeting. If there's anyone that would like to address the committee, please, for items not on the agenda or for which they cannot stay, please come forward, state your name, and you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Jeff Heller, thank you to the committee for all the time you put in. I'm on the General Plan Update Committee, and I put in so much more time than I ever thought I would. So I want to thank you all for the work you're doing for the city. I don't think this item is on the agenda. As you know, there is a pause in the water reclamation facility project, and I know you're reviewing budgets. It's that time of the year you're putting together the 17-18 budget. And I got an account here that I think you'll be reviewing if you haven't already. It's number 3218312, which is the WRF budget for 17-18 of about $4.3 million. And it seems to me, considering that the project is on pause, that this item should be pulled and reevaluated and resubmitted back into the budget once these numbers get straightened out. The 2 numbers that I have the biggest problem with is the program management DB procurement at $1.2 million. I don't know what we're getting for $1.2 million, considering the fact that nothing is under construction. What is this for? I mean, I could manage the program for considerably less by myself. The other number that's a problem is the $1.2 million for the lift station force main design. That's design phase only. That's to design the lift station, the piping that runs from the new lift station out to South Bay Boulevard. It's my understanding South Bay Boulevard, we have an MOU for the land. We haven't purchased the land, and until we own that land, we should not be spending millions of dollars designing pipelines and lift stations. That needs to be pulled. The other consultant fees, oddly enough, all seem to end in 3 zeros, which makes me think, well, what's the basis for those? So, frankly, I would pull this whole sheet until the pause for the WRF is over and you have community support for the numbers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other comments? Heller, H-E-L-L-E-R.
Hi, I'm Carol Truesdale, living in Morro Bay since 1995 on Kodiak Street, and I concur with what Mr. Heller has just said. I think this should be pulled for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, for your comments and for your attendance. Any other public comment? All right, thank you. I'll close public comment. I guess I could make a brief... Oh, I'm sorry, sir.
Hi.
Hi.
I've never been to one of these particular meetings, so this is the first. Thank you for everything you're doing. I concur with everything Jeff said and everything Carol said across the board. I also...
Excuse me, your name, please?
Kerrigan Mahan, resident.
Thank you.
I don't know where this stands. They passed the A8 the other night. I think to the tune of $711,000 or $711,000. What I don't understand is we keep going out to these 5-star consulting firms, and I don't understand it. I mean, $711,000 for a report? Aren't there engineers all over this town, retired, semi-retired, that could do this for $150,000? I mean, this is insane. This is a little town of moderate means of 10,000 people. Throwing money around like, dare I say, it's water. Sorry, but this is This has got to be revamped across the board. Rounding off things, 300,000, 200,000, 200,000, 700,000, call it $1 million. You know, come on. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Is there any other public comment? All right, thank you, folks. I will close the public comment. Close it for public comment. A couple just preliminary or comments based on the comment received is, number one, this committee, the Finance Committee, over a year ago came up with a very high-level template for the water reclamation facility, and we worked with the WRFCAC, Water Reclamation Facility Citizens Advisory. We receive quarterly reports on that, and I was looking to get this committee more involved in the budget, the actuals, the reporting. However, we had several vacancies on this board for almost a year, and we didn't have enough members to even have a subcommittee of more than 2. So we hear your comments, and we are going to get more involved in that. Please be aware of that. Secondarily, this board is an advisory board. We give recommendations based on what the City Council directs us to review and research, and we were not asked on the $711,000 contract, but we take your comments very seriously, and some of that was maybe a timing issue with our meetings. We were trying to schedule a joint meeting with the WRFCAC, and so it could be a little timing issue. But regardless, we accept your comments. We will take them under advisement and proceed from there. So thank you. No, you have 3 minutes. Please proceed. State your name and...
Good evening, Barbara Dorr, Morro Bay resident. Thank you for this opportunity. I'll just read real quickly. The B&W sewer water rate report should begin with the costs, the project costs, and the estimated date of construction. For a date specific, the estimates that are given are the current estimates, $124 million, and with recycling, $167. The report states, quote, project costs are shown in current dollars. Actual project costs are expected to go higher, accounting for construction cost inflation. The report shows cost estimates for the same project as almost $136 million, with the zero, with 3% cost escalation and no recycling, and almost $184 million with 3% escalation and water recycling. 2 years ago, in the 2015 report, the referenced amount for this project without recycling was $75 million. Please provide a total amount estimate for the cost of financing, not just the annual cash flow or an amount shown in the monthly rate estimates. And for financing, the project cost will most likely double when financing is considered. $272 million versus $368 million. I don't think we can afford that in Morro Bay. Please ask the city to clearly tell residents the amount of the WRF with financing. The County of Orange, I used to work for them and I get a retired employee newsletter. The County of Orange is building a new civic center in Santa Ana. The Voice of Orange County, an article, little newspaper, states, up for supervisor's approval Tuesday is an ordinance that raises the money for the projected project by issuing $158 million in bonds, and taxpayers would spend $315 million to pay off that debt over the next 3 decades. A follow-up newsletter from the construction industry stated that it was $178 million in bonds, and the repayment would be $315 million. So there's a before and after the Board of Supervisors meeting. So I think it's fair to figure the price is going to double, and divide that by the number of residents or properties in this city and give us a realistic picture. I've never seen that amount, total cost for financing. They give $671,000 per $10 million and all these other things, but it needs to be more specific and accurate for all of us. I mean, there are too many people. I mean, we have 43%, something I read recently, 43% higher than average in senior citizens living in our community. They're on fixed incomes. First, just a suggestion, is the projects are numbered 0 through 4. I mean, is 0 what we don't want or something? Usually. I would suggest that the numbering in the report be 1 through 5. 0 through 4 is just plain old silly. I recommend against putting our bills on the property tax. Stay with the monthly billing service, and if these people want to charge you more because they're getting more money, they're billing more dollars, find another contractor who will do our billing service for us. I mean, it could be thousands of dollars added to our property taxes. I mean, that's just outrageous. And we're currently on pause, is my understanding from a council meeting I was at. And I think we're probably in more pause because we need a replacement city manager. But I would just ask you to, and that's costing us being on pause, that 3% annual escalation fee. But I would just ask you to please have this be an accurate report for us for the 2018. And go back to the 2015 report. People said it should never been accepted the way it was. I'm almost done. Don't worry, Barbara. And I excuse me, I've been running in a tennis ball. It's been going under the gas pedal all the way over here. Anyhow, that's about all I wanted to say. I wanted to thank you for your time. But please think of us and that potential $300 to $350 million that we're going to have to pay back. Morro Bay can't afford that. This is, Orange County, this is since 1994, their bankruptcy, and I was working there then. This is the highest bonds they've gone out for, the $158 million since then. That's a whole county paying for that building. This is one little 10,000 population city that's going to have to pay for a project almost as large as that. Thank you very much for your time and letting me come back.
Message received. Thank you. That item is on the agenda. We will be discussing our comments and as we go along, so thank you.
Yeah, if we could just clarify, we're strictly talking about the comments specifically related to members of CFAC that individually compiled. So that's it, not to discuss the project as a whole.
Exactly. Thank you. Okay.
I had very similar comments to what was just made here. Other than the numbering, I'm not sure about that. But
well, I want to discuss our comments.
Are we going to talk about this on item number 4?
Yes, we are, and that's why I have time limits on these. So we don't. Last time we didn't get to some of these items, and we jumped around. So we will. Thank you, Bart. That's why I asked Craig to include all the comments. All right, so let's move to item B1. That is a continuation from the April 18th CFAC meeting. That item is the discussion on the implementation of the city's purchase order software system. I've allotted 15 minutes for that. Craig has given us some information. Go ahead.
Just a point of clarity, the approval of the minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped that. Yeah, okay. My mistake. Approval of the minutes from the last meeting. I noticed it said there were only 6 members present. I thought we had a quorum present. All 7 members were at the last meeting. So if we could just make that slight adjustment to the April 18th minutes, and then can I have a motion to approve those minutes? Are there any other corrections or updates?
I move that we accept the minutes as amended.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Okay, so the motion was made by Bart Beckman, seconded by Walter Heath. We'll make that one adjustment, okay? Thank you. All right, now we are on to business items. Item B1. And Craig, would you like to discuss that? And we'll discuss it or respond, please.
Certainly. Thank you, members of CFAC. Craig Smollinger with the Finance Department. So we did have this item on for the last CFAC meeting. Obviously, that meeting, we didn't quite get to some of the items on the agenda. we're here to talk a little bit about our purchase order system that the city has purchased as a module into our financial software system titled New World Systems. So this is kind of a plug-in module, if you will, so we can utilize our financials along with a electronic PO system. So that system was purchased in 2015, in summer of 2015, and actually installed in the system. However, that is yet to be implemented. There's been several reasons for that. We do have some audit findings related to a comprehensive set of policies and procedures for our finance department as a whole. The reason I mention that is essentially what's holding us back from implementing this PO system. The last thing you would want to do is implement a new system and not have stringent controls on different departments going in and trying to fiddle their way through a PO system without clear procedures on who's doing what, who can approve, a flow chart internally, both in the system and outside of that, so they know who to call, who the correct people are within each individual department to move forward with a PO, and things of that nature. What we're not saying is we do not have a system in place to move forward with purchase orders currently. It's just done an older version. So instead of laptops or using a computer type system, it's done in paper format. So we have a whole matrix, and that's been created based on authority granted by either the City Council or by the State of California, with what me wearing a purchasing agent hat, what I can sign off on and what's required, whether that be some type of piggyback procedure through a state contract or maybe the county contract or something like that. And that matrix details the dollar figure and the amount of the contract, or the type of the contract, or purchase order, that we'd move forward with, and what kind of signature authority would be required, and what kind of bid requirements and things like that go forward. So that process does require written approval from a department head, a minimum from myself as purchasing agent, and potentially up to the city manager. And if we get above, depending on the contract type or PO type, could require city council approval as well. So we have a system to take care of it in place. It's just not the electronic system with that module we purchased for the New World system. Couple reasons why we have yet to implement that. As noted in a Management Partners 2015 organizational and financial study of city operations, we are running lean and mean in the finance department. We're very leanly staffed there just to take care of routine duties. If you add on things like right now, like budget or audit season, it's hard to get to regular kind of duties, let alone bigger project implementations such as these. Coupled with having new staff coming into the finance department as of October 2016, including myself. 4 to 5 people in finance are new in there. It's not an excuse, but the priority is placed on getting our new staff up to speed on their regular duties. Projecting when we might be able to get to this PO system and get it implemented. We did have an item go before City Council at the last meeting requesting some additional resources for our finance department so we can get to things like this. Comprehensive policies and procedures, PO system implementation, curing some of those audit findings that we heard about recently and kind of been enduring type things, as well as some other projects as well. City Council requested that when we bring the budget forward for study session number 2 on May 23rd, so a week from yesterday, we would identify both the cost of that position, which we already have. We assumed a 75% general fund split to that and 25% on non-general fund for support for some of our enterprise funds. It will be interesting how we prioritize some of the other programs where what we presented before the council is a balanced budget. So if you present a balanced budget and you want to go up on expenditures, you've got a couple options. Either you cut somewhere else or you've got to transfer in from our general fund emergency reserve. So that'll be a discussion we'll have with council a week from yesterday. So with that, certainly open to questions and comments from CFAC.
So would there be any benefit to implementing this system without the comprehensive policies and procedures in place? Would there still be some labor savings or efficiencies gained?
Maybe very slight savings. I wouldn't recommend going that route.
Okay. Comments, John?
Yeah, Craig, the reason this came up was in the context of the review of the CAFR, the annual financial report. And as I recall, the council was concerned because expenditures in the general fund had exceeded budget by some $700,000. And what was the answer that I understood that came from staff was that, well, we really should have come to the council with a budget amendment sometime before the fiscal year ended, and that wasn't done. So you must have known that these over expenditures were occurring, and I'm thinking that that's what a purchase order system would help you to do, would be to see over expenses that you're not aware of. So maybe you could help us out in understanding what did happen last year, and how did you end up over like that?
Certainly. So expenditures over appropriation, obviously a bad thing, horrible finding for us to have. However, we've had some back and forth with the auditor since then with new staff to gain a better understanding of what exactly happened and what's included in that. We actually think it was a little bit of an accounting error with the report that was presented by the Poon Group. We'll be reviewing that, and we'll have that presentation with next year's audit findings based on the 16-17 actuals. That's not excusing any kind of over expenditure, and certainly myself and the rest of our new staff, our new budget and accounting manager and senior account tech, do go in on a regular basis and look at our budget performances to make sure we are not overexpending. We did have an item that went forward with a couple of budget amendments roughly 2 months ago to council, and that's part of our routine practice now. So if we do identify issues like that, we'll certainly move forward to make those corrections in our financial system and with our approved budgeted appropriations. To your point about having an encumbrance built into the system as well, that would help some of those things, certainly it would. For those of you that aren't terribly familiar, it's a set aside of your funds knowing that those are going out. So that'll certainly help going forward, and that's something we want to implement.
Well, that was a recommendation in encumbrance accounting of this committee well over a year ago. Your predecessor said your current systems could not accommodate that. So,
well, it's something we can certainly look into and will and are.
Okay, thanks. Any other comments?
Sure. Craig, could you detail a little bit more the timeline? So a week from when you're going to ask for financing for a full position, or can you detail that piece a little bit more?
Yeah, certainly. So we had budget study session number 1 with council on May 9th, so a little over a week ago. And then a week from yesterday, so May 23rd coming up, we'll have that study session number 2. For anyone that's interested in speaking about whatever you want to talk about, that'll be from 3:30 to 5:30 right here. In there, we're going to present essentially our budget binder. So last time when we presented, we presented detailed financials, including the proposed 17-18 budget. This year, we're going to produce something like on the website, so it's just the clean sheets by department. In there, we'll certainly have a conversation about priorities and potential available funding sources to fund that position. What we did recommend was a 4-year limited term position based on a lot of projects we need to accomplish, but once those get kind of up and running, we get the policies and procedures and we get a PO system and we get some of these other things rolling, we won't need that level of staffing necessarily to move forward. So we're certainly looking at it with a financial lens as well to make sure we're not, kind of overextending finances to take care of these things.
And so the goal of that position is to get those systems in place, not just the PO system, but the audit report found, a few errors, including not really having comprehensive policies and systems in place.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
I have 2 questions. And the first is, because I'm still not getting it, how close are you to having the comprehensive policies and procedures in a final draft form?
In short, not very.
Just to be clear, we were asked to help with that over a year ago as well. We didn't have the expertise here to do it. Just FYI.
It sounds like a simple process to have a policy or procedure to move forward. It's a very long, arduous process where you need to make sure that you're current operations fit in with exactly what you're doing with your systems, with your personnel, with your splits, making sure those align with current, not best practices, but requirements of GASB reporting and things like that, cash handling policies and procedures, separation of duties, all those types of things. I'm not saying we do not have financial policies and procedures, because we do. Are they comprehensive? No. What we also have, and we've worked on with staff, actually sitting next to me, Monique here, what we've done is updated our desk reference manuals, which will be a great guide to getting to the policies and procedures. It's kind of that base level block that build into that. We're working on it. In all estimations, I don't think we'll probably get that done without outside assistance and resources until we're done with the audit for next year.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My second question is to what extent is the current purchase order system that you're using a piece of departmental meetings? What I'm getting at is to what extent can it be predictive? Because my concern is that as you go along and you're reaching maybe 50% of an appropriation limit, there's always that project in the offing, that's 6-8 months down the road. Once you start bumping up against that limit, someone's going to say, but this is essential. This is something that we need to do. To what extent are those things being discussed in departmental meetings so that you can have a sense of what's on the horizon and how it might impact reaching that appropriated budgetary amount?
So we don't have standing PO meetings or anything like that with department managers. Rather, we have routine meetings with all the departments to discuss things like this, other financial matters, budgetary concerns, position filling, things like that, where things like this do come up. If there's a request to come forward and they are going to issue a PO, I'll sit down and look at their financials and their budget performance, and then go back to the guiding budget document to see what was included in the budget to make sure that they've got appropriate funding set aside to take care of that. To Mr. Martin's point earlier, an encumbrance system would help with that. It would make it cleaner. It'd make it easier on me, to be honest, but we still do go through with that process.
Okay. Thank you.
That is consistent with our attendance at previous departmental budgets and city manager meetings. There's not a system to help with the encumbrance, but the department heads certainly know about it and report on it on a regular basis. John, comments, please, if you have any.
Yeah, I was just curious on a piece of history. How many people were in the finance department prior to your being hired?
Same amount. There's the same full-time equivalent, so FTE positions. That's been an enduring level. When you look at the finance department proper, not accounting for utility billing, which sometimes you account for that, sometimes you don't, because those are enterprise funded positions, we have 4. So it has been 4 since 2007, 2008, when the economy kind of went down, and there was 5 at that point. And there was 6 a little bit before then. There were 6, excuse me.
And then, personally, I would support touching some emergency funds in order to start getting that staff, just because of the issues that we keep hearing. And the other question, do you have an outline of these policy and procedures, which just a summary outline listing the titles of what things you're developing?
We don't in one clean document. We do have examples that we're going to use and are using to move forward. But we don't have each one of those by name and title going forward, because we just haven't gotten there yet, to be honest. We will, but we don't yet.
Thank you.
I agree with John that I think there has to be a plan forward. It's either you're not going to do it, or...
Your mic on.
Oh, I thought you left it on. I'm sorry. I think there has to be a plan as to how it's going to be done. I realize one of the options is to include another person in the budget, but one way or the other, either you're not going to do it, or this is how we're going to do it, or just budget for that with some emergency funds. My overarching comment, though, has to do with when I first got on this committee, probably 6 months ago or so, I had shown an interest in all the various systems, which would include the overall financial system as to how we're forecasting, how you know all the costs coming in. And I'm not sure how this one particular system out of many somehow rose to the level that we're talking about it when we don't have an overall perspective on how the systems do or don't work together. So I'm still of a mind that I'm very interested in understanding how all the various systems work, how this one goes with new orders. And it's a long discussion, but again, I don't understand how this one jumped up when I've been asking to look at all of them, and we said, let's wait till everybody gets here, then all of a sudden one of these systems comes into play.
So briefly, if I can touch on that, not all of the IT systems that we have are finance specific, so probably not directly applicable to the roles and responsibilities of the CFAC. So that's kind of my shorthand answer to that.
Well, it also came up, Bart is correct, we've asked for a presentation a while back, but I was waiting for some new members, number one. This came up, Bart, because it was in the audit findings from the external auditor, so that's why I think there's been attention to that. Dave.
I just wanted to let my fellow committee members know I did submit a list of questions to Craig. I submitted them late, so I didn't expect to get answers to those questions by this meeting. But the basis of those questions was to try to get a better understanding of how the city currently does business with regard to purchase of goods and services, and how implementation of this New World purchasing module might change that. So I'm looking forward to getting answers to those questions at some point when you have time to do it, and maybe we can discuss that if the rest of the committee thinks it'd be appropriate in a future meeting. You mentioned a current procedure matrix. Would you equate that to having like a desk procedure for purchasing goods and services, for issuing purchase orders, for going through the whole purchasing process?
I wouldn't equate it to a desk reference manual, for example. It's a couple-page matrix that outlines the cost of the service or the PO that you're looking to move forward with, what type of purchase you're looking to move forward with. Is it a consultant contract? Is it a good, a service, whatever the case is? And then that has been vetted for appropriateness based on either historical council action with what they have delegated to either the city manager or the purchasing agent or department head, or based in California state law. What's allowed, what has to come back to city council for approval, things like that. So it's a document that actually all department heads do have, so they know what to reference. I talk to them frequently. If they've got a question, so we can clarify what's required. And if a PO is required, then we've got our form where they can go in and put all the relevant details, what the accounting is coming from, where it's been budgeted. You would attach bids if required. If you needed 3 bids to go forward with a certain purchase, we'd have those attached as well prior to me signing off on that. So that's kind of the process and how that works.
Are you planning on developing a desk procedure, a desk manual for the new purchasing system, including an instruction on how to actually use the system, in addition to something that would give people a general overview of requirements, policies, and procedures related to purchasing?
Absolutely.
Now, the procedures that you need to develop that are holding up implementation of this system, I presume you're going to come up with a comprehensive finance policy that covers a lot of different aspects of finance. Is this purchasing process going to be buried in that, or is it going to be a separate, again, like I said, a separate desk manual or purchasing manual, if you will?
That should be a separate policy and procedure that's probably referenced in that overriding financial document as well.
Okay. Is the development of this policy and procedure manual for purchasing, is that something that would lend itself to getting some help from members of this committee, or is that something that you would rather be done internally by staff?
Certainly the CFAC group, especially now that you're a full group, this could be a good task, certainly to work with staff with some of your expertise as well, maybe via a subcommittee or something like that to bring back to the full committee. I would certainly hope that would be part of the process as well.
Okay, so you do see a role for members of this committee who are interested in trying to move this forward and get it implemented to form a subcommittee and help you and help the staff try to get that in place.
Conceptually, I see how that can work.
Okay. Well, that may be something that we want to consider adding to our work plan. I did have another question, too. You mentioned, and Susan Slayton mentioned before, that you are the de facto purchasing agent for the city. Now, in your role as a finance director, are you in a position to authorize payments?
Not sure I'm following your question there.
Can you cut checks? You yourself, personally, can you authorize payments against a purchase order, for example?
I could be the final signee on that. Yes.
Okay. Has the
auditor? Will I actually push the button to print the check? No.
Okay. Has the auditor ever addressed that, having the finance director also being the purchasing agent? Has that ever come up in any of the audit findings?
Not to my knowledge.
So as far as you know, the auditor's comfortable with that, with the finance director also being the purchasing agent?
I haven't seen any evidence stating that was an issue from any of the past few auditors or the audit reports.
Okay. Because my understanding is that isn't typical. So I just found it interesting. Usually there's a separation of roles to the point where the purchasing organization could be part of the finance department, but the actual purchasing agent is somebody else. Now, I understand in a tiny organization like Morro Bay with limited staff resources, that may or may not be feasible to have someone else do that. But again, I just thought it was kind of unusual.
And I think you strike a nerve of what we're challenged with every day, that separation of duties type thing. We have to get pretty creative with maintaining that separation of duties for a whole host of cash transactions or check processings or even opening mail. We had a meeting with our auditors for the initial internal control of our 16-17 findings. So they come out and they kind of look and see how you're doing, and then they come back in later in September. And they all commented that we're doing a good job for the size of staff that we have. So that'd be my response to that.
Thank you, Dave. And I will take that when we get to the item on the work plan. Dave and I have had some discussion, Craig. We're not just asking these questions and asking for presentations to understand the purchasing. We're trying to get to, can we assist with people that have, several of us have purchasing background, but specifically in municipal government, if we can help with that in some way without being an encumbrance or a hindrance to you, we want to do that. So. Go ahead.
I had one last question about staffing. Does each of the departments have a finance person to advise their department head?
The departments now enter their own accounts payable type functions into the New World system. But to say they have their own financial type person, a financial analyst or financial assistant, no, we're just too small to have that.
So does the department head do it himself, or does he have a clerk who helps him?
I can't speak to each of the departments or how they move forward with that, but we as a finance department, either through myself, our budget and accounting manager, or our senior accounting tech, maybe even our part-time AP clerk or our business license and TOT clerk, do work closely with all the departments. So we do provide that internal customer support to them as well to help out with things like that.
So the department heads are pretty much going commando when they are dealing with finances?
I wouldn't say that at all. Not at all.
Okay, thank you. Are
Thank
you
you.
done? I'm
Thank
sorry.
you.
Okay. Yeah, I think that will, very good discussion. I think that will conclude that, and we'll probably be revisiting this topic when we get to the work plan. So that brings us to item B2. That's the update on the third quarter, this current fiscal year budget. Craig was going to give us a summary. However, is there anyone in the public that would like to address the board, the committee here on that item B2? Okay, thank you. Close public comment. Craig, would you like to summarize item B2, please, for us?
Sure. So there was a special meeting roughly a month and a half ago where the CFAC chair and myself sat down with the full council and we went through the proposed FY 17-18 work plan for the CFAC. As you'll recall, a few...
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Are we on B2? That was the budget update. Were we going to do a third quarter, budget update?
Apologies. I was jumping ahead to B3. I apologize. So there was a request to take a look at the third quarter financials for the city and look and see how we're doing. We didn't do an in-depth dive like we do at mid-year. When we're moving forward with this, we took a look when we were compiling the FY 17-18 budget to use the current year budget and look at those trends to make sure we were trending correctly and we could recommend an appropriate level budget for the council to consider as a whole. Going by that, there weren't any major outliers looking at the budget. Everything's coming in pretty smoothly. Looking a little past that third quarter, looking into April, property taxes are already at 106% of what we'd anticipate now because we get those April payments that came in, and then we'll get a few incremental that come in as well. Sales tax and TOT are coming in pretty much in line with how we'd expect as well. Looking at personnel costs as a whole, which obviously is the biggest portion of our general fund, there's some areas where a little bit up, some are a little bit down. Overall, we're doing pretty well. If there are issues that we see towards the end of the year, certainly we'll come forward with a budget amendment request for council consideration so we don't overexpend our expenditures. Or approved appropriations, and that's where we're at. So, as I mentioned, a brief verbal.
That's okay. I asked you to bring that up just so that we could see we're on track. It relates a little bit to some of the questions about the encumbrance reporting, and more importantly, the second budget study scheduled for May 23rd and potentially a third budget workshop, I think, that was tentatively scheduled for May 30th. Both of those are in this location at 3:30, correct?
The May 23rd has been called for 3:30. If the May 30th will be announced, I believe that would be for 3:30 as well. We have to check back and look to make sure.
So if our committee members were to attend next Tuesday's budget workshop and then they had some comments on the next fiscal year budget, that would be the time to send those directly to you. Correct, because that is before the next CFAC meeting that it goes to council, June 13th, I believe.
So you're right, June 13th is the preliminary date that we have put out there for adoption. We'll see how that goes. If that doesn't work out, we have an emergency council meeting on the 27th where we can still have adoption prior to the end of the fiscal year. If you did have individual comments, certainly I can take those and submit those as individual members, or actually it would be as residents.
Okay.
So, just to avoid any kind of Brown Act concerns.
All right, are there any questions for Craig on the third quarter? Please go ahead, John.
Craig, do you provide a periodic written financial report to the council? And if so, what is the cycle on that? The one that compares budget to actual?
So what we've done so far this fiscal year, in my 8 months with the city, is we did that at the mid-year. So we did provide a written update to the city council to see where we were tracking at mid-year. It's been my experience that doing that on a quarterly basis doesn't provide a lot of, I'll say, meat or benefit it takes quite a bit of time to go through that process, and with a small staff, especially noting that we're a little bit lean in finance, it's a little bit difficult to do on a quarterly basis, especially go in and see where we've got certain figures like TOT or sales tax, where those are trailing indices. So you're going to have to make a lot of incremental adjustments in there to justify, if something's not coming in at 75% at third quarter as you'd projected to with straight line, justifying why that is the case or any differences like that. But we do that at mid-year. And then internally, we go through that on a regular basis just to make sure there aren't any outliers or any items of concern. If there is an item of concern, I'll certainly bring that forward for council consideration.
Okay, but you have your own internal management reports, which you review monthly or quarterly, or what do you do with that?
I guess I'm not sure what you're referring to with management reports.
Well, your software produces financial reports monthly, and I imagine your software allows you to input the annual budget into monthly increments so that you can see from month to month how your actuals are comparing to budget forecast?
Oh, certainly. Looking at more than monthly, routinely. I would say every couple of weeks we're poking around, either myself or our budget and accounting manager.
That's different. I thought I asked that question before as far as splitting the budget into months, and I thought the answer that I recall hearing was that the software system doesn't allow you to do that, to be able to do what John's talking about. Or was I mistaken or didn't hear correctly?
I apologize if I wasn't clear. We go in and routinely check, and we can do cutoff dates at certain times. Say we'll run a report effective the end of this month or last month or the month before, something like that.
So we're talking but I think if I understand where John was coming from, which is where I would like to come from, and maybe that's when we work for bigger companies, but that the budget literally would have been put in on a monthly basis to do what you're talking about. But the budget, I think, is put in as one number. So each line item, as I understand it, goes in as one number. So you got to keep it all in your head as to whether or not, would we normally have been here, or is this an expenditure that hits at the end of the year versus the beginning of the year? If that's where John's coming from. So the question is the budget allocated into months, or are the line items all put in as a lump sum for every budget item?
No, it's not put in months. It is a lump sum.
Okay.
Yep.
But does the software allow that?
That's something I can explore. I don't know, to tell you the truth. Something we can look into, certainly, though.
Because that's critical on some items, like, for instance, property tax, which comes in December and April, two big chunks. I mean, it doesn't do any good to take an annual amount and divide it by 12. That doesn't work for property tax. Yeah. So most modern software programs will allow monthly inputs. It's a lot more work, and with a small staff, that's probably what the limitation is, but boy, that sure is a handy tool for analyzing your budget to actual.
Goes back to what we asked for over a year ago in terms of the encumbrance and how you could either straight line the budget or put it in biannual payments, et cetera, et cetera. What I have noticed, Craig, is your predecessor would have to go in and run a special report and put all kinds of fields in and look at it. It was I would say, quite labor intensive compared to the kind of accounting systems that many of us at large companies utilize. So I would encourage all members just to get familiar with their reporting. Go out to the website under the hot topics, and next year's budget that was presented at the first budget workshop is loaded in there. I assume you're updating it as we go, but that would be a good start to understand how to read it.
Next year's proposed budget.
Proposed next fiscal year 17 to 18 proposed budget is on the website right under Hot Topics, the City of Morro Bay. Very easy to find. Okay, so are there any other questions or comments on Craig's summary of the third quarter current year fiscal budget and actuals reporting? It sounds like there's no, as you said, issues or problems or red flags coming up with these encumbrances. Okay, then I'll close that line item and proceed to item B3. That is the review of the CFAC work plan, our committee's work plan for next year. We discussed that last time. It was amended by City Council. That's in your agenda packet. And we may want to even establish some subcommittees right now in concert with that work plan. So the first item, this is on your agenda, page 10 of 24. It falls under the support of City Goal 1, achieve economic and fiscal sustainability. This is the Measure Q goal. Review the revenues and expenditures for FY 16-17, the current year, prior to December 31st at the end of this year. That's because there's a lot of numbers that come in late and adjustments due to tax revenue, et cetera. For input and recommendations to City Council starting third quarter of next year. So this is an ongoing goal that we do. I've been very involved in it. I'm happy to stay that involved. If we want a subcommittee to help with that, that would be great. I don't see any issues on that. In fact, we're going to discuss that later on our agenda here for next year, but it's a pretty straightforward goal. It's a review of all the expenditures generated under the district transaction tax, the half-cent sales tax that go ahead, John.
Just a question for clarification. In the bylaws for the committee, it says that we're supposed to do a semi-annual review of Measure Q expenditures and revenues. Has that been happening, or do we just do an annual?
I don't know that all 8 years I've been doing, or 7 years, we've done it always semi-annual, because initially the committee did not meet that often. We had the opportunity to do it, but the last couple of years we have been. For instance, I think that's what, well, no, actually, yeah, that was in our mid-year budget review, the Measure Q. Yeah, yes, we have.
And then the committee just produces an annual report to the council.
That's correct, yes.
But actually splits up the work for reviewing it into 6-month increments.
It's a pretty straightforward review, to be honest with you, because it's such a small portion, in my opinion. This is the first year it's top 7 figures, $1 million projected. It's been in the 800, 900,000. It goes to police, fire, pretty straightforward, public safety, and a storm drain, a few other miscellaneous items. So it's not a major issue, but we always look at it separately in the mid-year budget review, and then we look at it again at the end of the year. Then we put the last few years it's been a PowerPoint, sometimes it's a letter to City Council basically stating we've reviewed it. If we have any specific recommendations, if we disagree that any of those expenditures were misclassified and inconsistent with the Measure Q voters initiative, and that's pretty much it. Anything else from anybody on that? I think that's probably the easiest, most straightforward of our goals. So. Okay, so let's go to the second goal. That's the budget transparency. We want to continue on that. That is creating budget documents that are more easily understood by the general public, form a subcommittee to research and present ideas to the entire board here on some innovative budget presentations, provide to city manager by January 2018 to influence the following fiscal year's budget preparation. So that's on the website what we did, this committee, several of us, Dave, myself, and Marlis McPherson when she was on the committee, we prepared those. They are on the city website. We've had some pretty positive, actually all positive comments back. We were trying to figure out how many hits we were getting on that and couldn't quite do that. But we want to continue with that, expand on that, and that's where we're going to need a subcommittee to look at the work that we've done. How do we move forward? Get some citizen input. And so I'll open that up for discussion, comments, suggestions.
Madam Chair, I'd be happy to be part of any subcommittee you wanted to form on budget transparency.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else?
I would be glad to help with that.
Okay. Anyone else interested in that?
I'm also willing to participate. I was involved in developing the last document we did, so I would definitely like to be involved in that.
Okay, perfect. So the minutes will reflect that Dave Batant, Walter Heath, and Don Addis are interested in forming a subcommittee. And that's particularly important because Dave did a lot of the work on the last one, and we can look at how we can expand that, improve it, see what our citizens are saying, and move forward. Any other questions, comments, thoughts on that?
If I can jump in for a second.
Sure.
I wanted to highlight the great work that was done by this committee, including Marlis, who's sitting back there in the back row trying to hide. We didn't just take that report, or we won't just take that report and just have it hidden away on the website. So our budget presentation to council next week on the 23rd may not have this updated information in charts as a transparency, but we fully intend to do that by the time we get to adoption mode in June of this year. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Oh, okay, perfect. And it's my understanding that members of the public can join any subcommittee without being a violation of the Brown Act. Is that a correct assumption?
99% sure, but I will get back to the group on that.
Okay. That's what I was told by a couple other boards. So for those of you in the listening audience or the public watching this, if you would like to participate in this or help or give us some ideas or anything, we would very much welcome your participation. So thank you. And then the third item in our work plan is the semi-annual review of the budget performance, investment portfolio performance, contract expenditures, prepare comments, if any, to present to the City Council. That's almost a follow-up of the budget actuals, the mid-year actual, but it's expanded to include investment portfolio. Basically, we review a summary is what we have been doing in the past. And maybe if there's any questions or comments or suggestions on the contract performance, consolidating contracts or looking at those. That also is not scheduled to start until the second quarter. But if there's any members here that would have a particular interest in a subcommittee to serve on that, it would be something. All of us I think are responsible for reviewing the budget actuals, the general performance mid-year and year-to-date, so final. But any questions or comments and suggestions on this item? This is part of our CFAC plan. We do what we can on this. In the past, I think somebody has asked for maybe somebody from the investment portfolio to come and give a presentation. That's typically how I see a lot of other cities do that, present it, and then the board makes some comments or suggestions. We haven't gotten there yet, but we're willing to do that.
So that would be someone from a subcommittee looking at the investments from CFAC, or?
Okay, so if you had a subcommittee, they could maybe look at the portfolio performance. The last time we did it was over a year ago, Craig, and it was basically, why do we have so much in this category versus that category due to the returns? And basically it was a cash liquidation and what was going on, I believe, with the WRF, but things of that nature.
Okay, great.
It's pretty straightforward. I think there's not really, but we may have some members here that have some more experience than we, have in the past that may want to see a presentation. If your portfolio is held by Edward Jones, do they come out and present the last 12 months' performance, the last 5 years, the last 3 years? Do they have recommendations? Do we as citizens, maybe we should be more risk averse or less? That kind of thing is what I see that task.
Certainly, and the council has adopted an investment policy. It's included in the budget book as well. So when I go forward and if I make any kinds of investments or putting it in LAIF or a CD or whatever we're doing, we'll make sure those investments are consistent with that policy.
We actually reviewed that policy over a year ago, too.
Great.
Yeah.
It's a good policy.
Yes, I think it's pretty straightforward. A couple minor edits, but yeah, that's what I.
It is pretty risk averse, certainly.
That's what I thought. Okay. All right.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I have a question about where our review sits relative to what council is doing on this. Do we see the semi-annual budget review before they do or after they do, or how does this work?
Typically before, on the semi-annual. I mean, that's the goal. Otherwise, the recommendations are moot.
Yeah, and last year we had 2 members of the CFAC come in and sit down with the city manager and all the department heads to go through that level of review. So that happened prior to bringing that forward for council consideration and any kind of action.
Thank you.
And we're willing to still help in that. We rotated the members that went to, these were the department manager reviews. We rotated that so our other members could get some experience with how the city manager, it was a city manager decision, how he or she conducts their reviews.
Some people like to see how the sausage is made. So give you all an opportunity to get in there.
Okay, thanks.
And Craig, does that happen in January, February, or what's the time frame?
We brought our mid-year forward, I believe it was on Valentine's Day, to council, so that must have been in late January when we had that internal review.
And Craig, are you the city treasurer?
It's one of the hats I wear.
Okay. And do you produce a quarterly treasurer's report?
I do not.
Okay, so that used to be statutorily required, but then the state discontinued that when they didn't want to pay local governments to do state-mandated programs. But most local governments have continued doing quarterly treasurer reports. Are there samples of what was done in the past with that, or is that just something the city hasn't done for a long time?
I'd have to do some digging to see what's been done in the past. Certainly when we brought it forward for mid-year review to the CFAC this year, when we looked at that, we did have all the investments laid out and what we've done and got the the mid-year performance on that in the return of investment. But let me do some digging and I can get back to the group on that.
Go ahead.
So, Madam Chair, are you looking for volunteers for a subcommittee for this? Or do you do just a natural rotation? And what's your preference with that?
We could go either way. Right now, we don't have any pressing review coming up for mid-year yet, correct? So it would be more the final year. And we have a couple other items I'm going to add here, so that's why I didn't ask for volunteers yet. I didn't want to overload you just yet. But if this is something anyone's interested in.
I had a few comments for you.
Okay, yes, please go ahead, Dave.
It's appropriate now. As far as the investment portfolio is concerned, my view is that the investments are constrained by, first of all, the council's investment policy, and also there's some pretty strict constraints within state statute, as I understand it, about how public funds can be invested. So an analysis by a subcommittee, I'm a little skeptical that's going to really uncover anything that the city could do much differently than the way it's doing it now. However, part of this is also contract review. And I think that is something that a subcommittee could investigate and make recommendations on, possibly come up with a report. Because we keep hearing from the public concerns about how, the expenditures on contracts, particularly the legal services contract, but there's in general just contracts. These would include service contracts and consultant contracts. So I think it would be helpful in this committee's role in informing the public about these contracts, why they exist, what kind of expenditures are being made against them, what kind of controls are on them, and come up with a report to explain how the money is being spent. So I think that is something a subcommittee could look into and report back on. The other part of it, the investment portfolio, not so much.
So if I can ask a quick question, I apologize for interrupting. So what would be if that type of report was produced after an in-depth look at consultant contracts or contractual services, things like that, what would be the potential outcome product where we'd be advising the city council? I guess I'm not connecting the two on those.
Well, the way I would see it is one thing you could do is you could draw a comparison between outsourcing versus doing it in-house, doing the services in-house. Just provide an explanation, a simple explanation of what the contract actually does so that people understand why the contract exists and what services the contractor provides. So I just see it as being, a report to the public, if nothing else, about the contracts and again, what I mentioned, why they exist, how the money's being spent, to provide some assurance that the city is being prudent in how it contracts for services and consultants.
Are you suggesting the CFAC create that report or that the city staff create that report on contracts?
I would think the subcommittee could create that report.
The CFAC subcommittee?
The CFAC subcommittee could come up with a report.
So it wouldn't be extra work on the part of city staff?
I wouldn't think so, other than there may be some extra work involved in providing the documentation that the committee members would need to look at. I don't know how, some of the questions I asked about how the city does business is how the city conducts contract administration. I don't know what kind of files exist. I don't know where they're located. So there may be some difficulty in obtaining those. It may take some effort to obtain those, making copies and things like that. I think you really need to look at the contract to understand the contract. So you need to see a copy of it. If you want to review payments against it, I'm sure there's some kind of tabulation of payments against a contract.
So this is like an educational document for the CFAC as well as for the public, just to have a general understanding of how the contracting works, as well as what the contracts are for?
Yes.
Is that kind of the general outcome that we'd be looking for?
Well, yes. And one of the controversies is the legal services contract. That is somewhat of a controversy in the community. We used to have a city attorney who was a member of the city staff. We now contract those legal services. It's a big number. Where is that all being charged to?
I think it would be very helpful if it didn't put a lot of extra burden on a finance department that sounds like they're already pretty squeezed for personnel and for time. I didn't mean to take over Walter's comment.
Well, let's ask the finance department what they think of that.
If I can comment real quickly, I think there are two major contracts in question. One is the legal, and I think that if the visibility of legal could be more exposed rather than hidden all over the place, it's like $450,000, $500,000 that we're spending on legal contracts. So I'm getting away from sort of this generic brush of all contracting when I think we've got two major contract areas we're concerned about. One is legal, and I think the budget ought to be one that you don't spread the staff, I think should make it very visible as to what we're spending for legal contract. The other one are the contracts associated with WRF, as was brought up earlier. And I'm going to suggest that that's a whole separate subject on WRF finance issues, because that's one of the two elephants in the room along with the budget gap. So while I agree with contracting, I think it ought to be focused on the two. The legal could probably be addressed just by making it very visible as to what we're spending on legal rather than parsing the numbers all throughout the budget and finance documents, and then the WRF we address, as a separate issue on the contracting.
So maybe to summarize just a little bit, Dave brings up a very good point on the investment portfolio, and any broad brush research I've done with other finance committees, it looks like all they do is get a presentation from the experts that are managing the investments, and then the citizens give some input back, and it's almost like an education awareness to the citizens. This is how investments are, and before you make comments that our investment portfolio is performing weakly, you have to understand there's constraints, both municipal, governmental, as well as the cash availability of cash flow. So that I would agree with. We have talked about contracts for quite a while on this committee. Initially, we kind of had requested, I think at one time, maybe a listing of all the contracts, the termination dates, amounts, and we noticed that a lot of them were routine, whether it's Xerox copier maintenance or some tree trimming, and we didn't see anything that looked like should be investigated further. But I think what Bart has hit on is important. We will get to the WRF and the financing, or not only the financing, but the budget reporting. But in terms of maybe we start with one category of contracts and say, how could we summarize this information, make it more visible? Is it worthwhile information? I know where you can get it in the New World system, but he's correct. It's spread across every department.
So real quick.
Go ahead.
I think that fits pretty cleanly in with draft goal 1B, budget transparency, providing transparency to things like that. If somebody want to dive in and have a subcommittee, sounds perfect, fits right in there. Second one, I just want to make sure we're cognizant of the time right now.
Okay.
So we've got PWAB coming after us and still a couple extra items. So just throwing it out there.
Okay. All right. So then maybe on this, we could bundle that in with our subcommittee looking on the budget transparency, start with some contracts. You guys hash it out, see what you think. John, question, comment?
Yes. On this item, it's a C in the list. It's kind of a catch-all that summarizes most of the items in the 10 duties that are in our bylaws. But the one that is kind of a glaring omission is a review of the comprehensive annual financial report. And I wonder if that should be inserted in here as well, since that is one of the duties in our list of duties. And then to question, was that ever even done for fiscal year 15-16?
Okay, so to answer your question, I had put that on the agenda one time to review this, then but because our duties had to go all the way back to the full city council to get edited, we tried to clarify when we met on our work plan. But to answer but we could do that if we need to do that. The reason we don't have the review the CAFR is what you're asking about. Anytime we've asked for that before, we're told the city doesn't do that or doesn't have it. So I think Craig's trying to get there, but that's why it's never been reviewed. We couldn't get access. Not done.
So we fully intend on producing a CAFR this year, rather than a basic financial statement. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the difference between the two. There's not a ton outside of some demographic information and some information about the city and the widgets we produce and some outcome-based things. I think that fits in with draft goal 1E, audit findings. Maybe if we recraft that from audit findings to looking at that actual document a little bit, maybe that could fit in pretty cleanly. So just my thought.
That'll work. Okay. So then that brings us real quickly on the work plan. As long as we agree on this work plan, it's the level of detail that, may be subject to some interpretation. The fourth one is some general fund budget reductions. Craig and I had discussed that with council, that after we attend some workshops and look at some things, maybe we can make some recommendations as a committee as to where they could look for the $650,000 eventual reductions.
Yes, definitely, and within a few parameters, as you'll note in the descriptor under draft goal D. So looking at finance department operations as a whole, which can be, pretty encompassing, or looking at things that affect the entire general fund, like labor costs was the given example. So knowing that we're not all collective experts within, say, every area where the city provides a service, we didn't think it would be appropriate for having the finance committee dive in and say, hey, you should be, cutting trees at a lesser level or a higher level or something like that. So that was the intent behind this item.
Okay.
Could you give a little history on how you came to this $200,000 figure as opposed to some other figure for cutting? It says $200,000.
Well, I believe that was over a 3-year period they were going to phase in, and that was this year's goal, correct?
So really quickly.
Just quickly, yeah.
We, last year in early 2016, the city moved forward with a 10-year budget forecast. Wanted to look at what's coming up down the pipeline, where we've been, and that picture, frankly, looked quite a bit better than when we did that update early this year. So there's a couple reasons for that. There's an assumed slight recession going on in 2019, so not next fiscal year, but the fiscal year after. But the big change was the change in the discount rate from CalPERS. So going from 7.5 to not next year, but FY 18-19, 7.375, following year 7.25, following year 7. So that took our general fund emergency reserve and kind of showed it declining pretty steeply. Staff came back to council and identified that $650,000 would be needed to be cut from operations in order to make sure that general fund emergency reserve trend didn't keep declining down until you actually may potentially have to borrow money. So having some foresight before that happened. Council gave some direction to cut $250,000 from next year's budget, so we've included that in our proposed FY 17-18 budget, as well as an additional $200,000 the following year, FY 18-19, and then another additional $200,000 the following year. So that's where the $200,000 figure comes from.
So this is directly related to the PERS increase, it's kind of long story short.
And the slight recession, yes.
And the slight recession. And then this goal seems to work in conflict with the request to increase staff in the finance department. Am I misjudging that?
If you look at those discretely and don't look at needs or other potential cost reductions, then certainly, it certainly looks that way. We need to cut, why are we adding? It comes down to the priority of implementing these policies and procedures, the PO system, some of these other financial things that have been lagging, and some of those enduring audit findings. So that's kind of where the question comes in, where does that balance play in?
So, and my thought wasn't so much we need to cut, why are we adding, but if we need to add in the finance department, why are we looking specific to the finance department to make cuts? Or is that just on there because we're the CFAC?
Well, it says or applicable citywide. That was just the previous city manager didn't want us focusing on maybe another totally unrelated department, cut this department out. Wanted us to focus on where our expertise should be, finance. And if there's nothing there, then we focus on applicable citywide,
So we're not beholden to looking specifically at the finance department?
I would argue that if we're going to limit it to that, there's not that much there, and I would eliminate this. I do think this is one of the two elephants in the room, as I said, budget-wise, of a $3 million gap. This adds to it. So if this is literally just going to be looking at whether or not Craig's sufficient or something, I don't see this as a need for a goal. If we're not going to look at the 200 growing to 600,000, that overall $3 million gap issue, I say we take this off the list because I don't think there's enough meat there if we're limiting this to, just the way it's worded here.
So can we adjust that?
Certainly, we can recommend that to the council, certainly. So just to make sure I've got this right, for number 4, it'll include review and make recommendations in coordination with city staff on options to cut $200,000 or more from the FY 18-19 general fund budget that is applicable citywide. So basically,
exactly.
It's striking
just
out
strike out all that other.
There.
Exactly.
Okay.
We discussed that with them, Craig, when you and I presented it, because I questioned that as well. So. Okay, then real quickly on the audit findings, that was added. Review and make recommendations on the audit report of internal controls and management's response. So to the internal control findings, that means, Craig, you would be presenting us when that's complete, and then we would respond to that, correct? That's
Correct.
what I got
And
out of
based
that.
on Mr. Martin's earlier comments, maybe we revise that to say CAFR review / audit findings.
Okay.
Something to the tune of that.
Yeah,
might work.
are we okay with that, folks? Very good.
In fact, I would recommend that we have a subcommittee for that.
That's very good, and that's why I didn't ask for the names. Thank you, John, on the other subcommittee, because there's quite a few here that would be probably more pressing immediately. So, John, I'd like to ask, with your experience, you serve on that
Sure,
subcommittee,
absolutely.
or lead it, if you will.
Okay.
And then who else would like to participate on that?
If I can jump in real quick.
Go ahead.
I just recommend the CAFR is a pretty technical document. If you jump into,
I've seen it. I know.
without having some overview knowledge of that, just recommend maybe someone who's got some decent knowledge of that. Certainly. be part of it.
That's why I asked. You're familiar with it, right, John?
Yes.
Great.
I would like one of those presentations about the portfolios.
If we get to that, yeah. Right.
If we got to that, I think that would be a good one to keep.
Yeah, but on this subject for this.
Well, not on this, but going back to the other item before we close this discussion.
I haven't asked for a presentation on the investment portfolio yet. I'm trying to balance, but yes, that would be for all of us, not a subcommittee.
Exactly.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so are you John, and then maybe you keep us updated and posted. I can assist with that.
Could we have a third?
Let's see, Dave's on something. Maybe it'd have to be me. Okay, I'll do it. Perfect. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm trying to watch the time. And if we have to come back to some of this next time, we certainly will. All right, so that should bring us, we have 2 items left and not, go ahead.
Okay, David brought up the purchase system procedures to be involved, and I'd like to throw out the WRF cost analysis. Obviously, there are people in the city who thinks that that's something we ought to be interested in. The only comments we got tonight were relative to that issue. It's probably why I personally got involved in this committee, and I would be more than happy to lead subcommittee discussions on that issue. I think we need to be very creative. I think the City Council has started down that path, and it involves I guess some of them are gone now, but it involves the comments that were made earlier, and we could team with the finance people from WRFCAC to do that. But I think we ought to have that be a major part of what we do.
All right, so let's look at that quickly here. Do we want to amend this work plan to look at the PO system implementation at this point, or can we, and I'll look to Dave for some comments, or can we combine that with something else here, or should we wait till things settle in terms of employee?
Well, it was under audits is where that came from, right?
Yes.
Sort of brought this forward.
I would prefer to see what happens if they get the extra staff. If the staff is approved, see what's going to fall under that person's purview. I personally feel like while the purchase system is key and highly important, I think the bigger picture to me would be the most important, and getting staff in place to look at that bigger picture. I wouldn't personally advocate to have that on our work plan at this point.
Okay, thank you, Dawn. Dave, are you okay with that?
I'm okay with waiting on that.
Yeah, okay. Doesn't mean it falls off. It just means we're not going to commit to do, I would rather commit to do less and get it done, completed, than a laundry list. Okay.
I'm wondering at this point, because contract analysis was raised, where would contract analysis fit in, or would we want a separate group looking at that? I'm keenly interested in looking at the contracts that Bart and Dave made, the legal services contract, and also the wharf contracts.
Well, we discussed doing the contract analysis for the legal as part of the budget-friendly documents in the budget transparency. So Walter, Dave Batant, and Don, you're on the hook for that.
Okay.
So I do think at some point we will need to work, and maybe even a joint meeting with the WRFCAC on the water reclamation facility budget and actuals reporting. And that could be a good subject for the next meeting, because our quarterly report was due on the WRFCAC in May, and that meeting got canceled. So I'm expecting we will see that in June, and then that might be how do we branch into this committee.
But are you saying this subcommittee is limited to looking at the legal contracts and not looking at the WRF contracts as part of the budget transparency? Because it seems like both were
I don't know that I want to say it's limited, but if you look at that budget transparency, there's a lot of work there to do. And I would start with something smaller and manageable, the legal, and then proceed from there. And if that committee wants to take on the next thing or invite somebody, different, we have to be, we can only have 3 members, then we would go to the wharf, the water reclamation facility. Right now, there is a finance subcommittee on the WRFCAC, so I think we defer to, them, and then that should be brought to this committee, I think. So for right now, I think I would include the budget transparency for the contract analysis. Start with something small like the legal or any other contracts that pop out of that, and then we'll move on to maybe in our plan. Maybe we don't add it now, Craig, but we would like to get, as I stated, we would like to get more involved in the budget and analysis for the water reclamation facility. And the stepping stone, the initiative for that should be let's look at the third quarter report that comes out from the WRFCAC, and then now that there's a slight pause, this would be the time to step in, get involved.
Yeah, you certainly could. As you mentioned, the WRFCAC does have that subcommittee as well that is looking at the financials, along as obviously the WRFCAC as a whole. I know the Public Works Advisory Board, the PWAB, as well as looking at those things. I just want to caution against maybe biting off a little bit too much for next year.
That's what I'm
We're starting to get into several projects, which is great. It's great that the committee is now fully staffed, so you can start looking at these things. Just something to think about.
And that's my concern, quite honestly. That's it right there in a nutshell. And plus, overburdening the staff with more. I want to see what we can come up with, and if we can come up with a nice report for the contracts and the legal and the budget-friendly documents, we're ready to move on and start analyzing the WRF expenditures. So hold that thought.
Okay, we need to make it clear as whether or not the Finance Committee is going to be a player in reviewing the WRFCAC financial issues, or those issues, so we don't get in each other's way, are to be addressed by the WRFCAC Finance Subcommittee. Obviously, people here are confused. The people who came to speak tonight think that somehow, since we're saying finance, that we ought to be concerned about that. I happen to think we ought to be, but I'm okay with saying, no, let's compartmentalize that view with a finance subcommittee of WRFCAC, and then I personally would like to see how I could get involved on that subcommittee. But either we're going to play or we're not going to play relative to this committee on that issue, and I can see how not playing is an option, so we don't have our committee sort of dueling with the finance subcommittee, but one way or the other.
Who is on the finance subcommittee in the WRFCAC?
Myself, Ginny Gorelick, and Richard Sadowski. We would more than welcome, once you get clarification on any other members, yes. getting involved. I'm not saying we don't play. I guess I'm just trying to hold off making a decision right here, right now, when we've asked for volunteers on all these other subcommittees, and we're in the middle of a pause.
And I'm okay, but we just need to make sure the community understands which issues they should be concerned about coming here to talk about versus City Council versus WRFCAC, because otherwise they'd feel like, oh, I'm wasting my time here if you're not going to do that. That's why I recommended a subcommittee. I don't have a problem at all with just me personally getting involved with your other subcommittee and just making a statement that that's not part of this committee because it's already being addressed by WRFCAC.
I'm in agreement with you on that, Bart, because we're looking potentially, if we're involved, bringing in Mike Nunley for another meeting, and he gets paid by the meeting. I don't want us to start to become part of the problem by adding that additional level.
John?
Bart, just have to be careful that there aren't 4 of the members of this committee attending that finance subcommittee, because that would be a Brown Act violation. So you could attend, and Barbara could attend, but we couldn't have 4 of us there participating.
And I don't have a problem with being a citizen that goes and participates in your meeting. I mean,
that's a good point, because the status procedure to date has been go to the WRFCAC, go to City Council. So I'm just advocating I don't think we're ready to make a decision that we're going to take on another subcommittee for a project of that magnitude right now at this minute. And I would ask you all to think about it for next time, or in the interim, make it clear, as it has been to the public, all that information is on the WRF website, and that's where...
But we didn't tell these people that tonight. We basically let them give us comments, and since we didn't say otherwise, they're assuming that at some point we're going to address those. And we're saying, no, we're not, as this committee.
As of tonight, we are not.
Okay, all right. That's fine.
So are the WRFCAC Finance Subcommittee meetings open to the public?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. I mean, we haven't announced it or anything. A lot of it's been done individually, and we collectively bring it to the committee.
That might be where the problem is. They might need to be publicly noticed so that people aren't coming to meetings expecting to get some resolution on some things, and we're not in a position to give that to them.
Yeah, this is a major issue with this 218 discussion going on. We could shoot ourselves in the foot as a city if we don't aggressively address how do we get the cost down with a project that actually will go forward. So that, to me, like I said, there's the 2 elephants, and this is the really big elephant.
I understand. I think that was made abundantly clear at the April 25th and the following City Council meetings. I don't think it's any surprise that our leaders are addressing that now.
Could we just clarify the statement about the Brown Act and taking off one hat of being a committee member and then going as a
Basically, a subcommittee cannot represent a majority of your members. We have 7 members, so any subcommittee cannot have 4 members on it, on a subcommittee or meeting at any other public meeting.
Right.
That's not properly noticed.
I'm just going to
3. That's why I was asking for 2 to 3 on the subcommittee.
I'm just going to Bart's comment that he could just attend as a member of the general public. So can you just take off your hat of being a CFAC and say, no, I'm here as general public, and not violate the Brown Act?
I'm going to have to check on that as well.
Yeah,
but I'll report.
I'd like clarification on that specific point.
I don't think you can, but
I don't think you can.
I think as long as there's no more than 3 of us at that meeting participating, then it's okay. But if there were 4 of us at that meeting participating, then that, in fact, is a meeting of this committee, and that has to be noticed and agendized.
All right, can we move on to the next 2 items?
Where did we leave this? Did we make a decision, or we're going to put it off and sort of vote next month as far as whether or not this committee's going to address financial issues for WRFCAC, or are we making the decision now
I think we're making the decision now that the finance issues will continue to be addressed by the WRF-CAC Finance, the WRF-CAC Committee and the WRF-CAC Finance Subcommittee at this point. That doesn't mean we can't, change our mind in 90 days after we work on some of these other items. Craig, is that how you understand our discussion? Or does anybody want to, we can make a motion and do it differently?
That was my understanding, and just a procedural note that the point of going through this exercise today is to come up with a draft work plan that the council will later bless and say, yes, advisory body, we want you to work on all these things. So that was the intent of this. Look at it, see if it makes sense, see if there's some other areas that make sense to dive into and recommend to the council, and then the council will move forward from there.
Okay, so then maybe do we want to add this as a potential item, even if we're not going to start working on it immediately, to the work plan and seek council guidance?
That could be a request of the CFAC. You'd made some points going the other way, several members have, or going for. My personal feeling, whatever that's worth, is we do have a couple other bodies that are looking at this specifically. Without some direct coordination between all these groups, you might inadvertently either send a different message or dive into a different area, or just have messages going like this, where similar to what we just had a few minutes ago, or actually at the start of this meeting where we had some confused public members, this could spin this in a completely different direction, have people even more confused, because you have different stories coming from different bodies. So just my 2 cents.
I would be in favor of lending Bart's expertise to the WRF-CAC Finance Subcommittee, certainly. I mean, in a formal way, not just as, a citizen representative, as somebody who's part of that committee, if you're open to doing that.
Well, the WRF-CAC's full right now. We can't bring on another member, but we can, as soon as he gets clarification, we can invite somebody on as a member of the public. If Bart's agreeable with that. Okay, so then we won't change anything on the work plan other than what we have, I think, unless somebody wants to make a motion otherwise, taking Craig's advice under.
Well, I'm sorry, just a question in regards to our involvement with the rate study. So should that also be part of the WRF-CAC Finance Subcommittee's task? Because we do now have a little bit of a crossover since we're looking at the rate study that's associated with the wastewater plant.
Okay, so on that, which was the next item, I asked Craig to include everybody's comments in the minutes because we had been asked to comment on the rate study at our last meeting individually. So I wanted everybody to see everybody else's comments as an education, whatever. That direction was on the rate study somewhat changed based on council direction on what's going on, but I still felt there was value in seeing all the comments, including them in the minutes, because I feel we will be asked again to comment on the rate study. So if we are specifically asked by council or staff to comment on something, we can, get involved and comment on it as we did for this.
I think we ought to take it off. I mean, basically, it forced the presentation that we had last time that's made in all these committees, and it's not good use of overall resources. I think we make a clean break. I think John brings up a good point that we just, I think, decided no, those issues, financial issues associated with WRF are going to be addressed in the other subcommittee. So other than it's happened, I think this gets taken off of our agenda.
Our work
so we're just not involved. And then they wouldn't have had to come and make, however long presentation it was, 2 hours or something.
But could the finance subcommittee from WRF-CAC present to us or submit something to us? I mean, I feel like we should have some eyes on it, not necessarily as part of our work plan or as part of their committee, but I feel like if we're the CFAC, we should know something about what's going on with the finances of the WRF.
I don't know that they could present something separate. You could attend the meetings, you could view them on the YouTube or, our reports.
I don't mean for me personally as
Yeah,
a citizen, I mean as a CFAC.
Mm-hmm.
If we're the CFAC, it seems like the CFAC should have some kind of eyes on the budget of the WRF, which is extremely important to this community. I don't know that it needs to be at the level of a subcommittee that we have, but some kind of...
Well, in the mid-year budget review and all the other budget activity, we will, because it'll be in that enterprise fund. In fact, we had them separated out for that specific reason, the 321 account, I believe. Yes. Mm-hmm. Any other discussion, thoughts? Anybody have any opinion one way or the other? Or?
Maybe we could request that agendas of the WRF-CAC be provided just as on an information basis to the CFAC, just so we can monitor the situation, but not just so we can understand how it affects the finances of the city.
Any citizen, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure I understand. Any citizen can, in fact, if you go on the website and set alert me or notify me for any of these boards, you'll see it all.
You'll get agendas and minutes.
Yeah, minutes, everything.
Just go to alert me.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a difference between just as citizens educating ourselves about the finances of the WRF and this body as a finance committee having some kind of, discussion more than a semi-annual report.
I think we'll have to hold that discussion for a future. We're running out of time, and now we've missed, I think we all want varying levels of, education. So
if I can jump in,
Yeah.
PWAB's going to come in here very shortly.
Okay.
So it might be worth, based on the discussion we had on the sewer rate study, as well as, actually, if we can potentially continue that item, what would be beneficial, I think, is to jump to item B5 for discussion on the Measure Q proposed budget, which fits directly in line with the intent of the CFAC committee. I'd like to jump in to that item if possible.
okay, thank you. I agree. Because this has to be done by the time the budget is adopted, basically. So this is it's on your agenda. I think it starts on page 21. Thank you, Walter. And the proposed expenditures for Measure Q next fiscal year. This is the district transaction tax.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Sorry, so if I can jump in, we're projecting a very slight increase in the total available revenue. Current year we have $1,019,000 and change. We're projecting is $1,024,000 for next fiscal year. Both of those figures are consistent with what our HDL, if you're familiar with Hinderleiter Delamas, I always mess up their name, sales tax experts all over California. Our projections are directly in line with what they're showing, along with the State Board of Equalization, excuse me. So we feel pretty confident with that $1,024,000 figure. So briefly going through the items that you're seeing on here on the budget request for appropriation, the top item is pretty simple. It's to pay back the certificate of participation that we have for the fire station loan. So that amounts to $91,512. That's a 30-year COP, so we will likely have that for a while, at least as a request in Measure Q. Directly below that is half of the school resource officer, There's a little change at the county level, or the school district level. They're going through some financial straits as well. So the proposed budget actually includes the second half of this SRO position being funded out of the general fund for a little while, so we can maintain that level of service and maintain some of those programs while some potential retirements happen in the future, which generally do happen. But that's not a change in appropriations for this Measure Q proposed budget.
But if I can interrupt there, we have discussed this over the Measure Q committee for years. That's always, I see there that it looks like the school district is no longer going to fund that at the 50%. They funded it at various rates from 75%, I think, all the way down to 25%. And the Measure Q committee discussed this a couple years ago after the Prop 30 proposition passed, where the schools got the additional funds, and agreed that we would fund it at 50%. So not discussing the benefits of that program, I think that's the police officer on campus at the high school. But my concern would be that when we're trying to make all these other budget cuts, or maybe looking at putting something on a property tax revenue, that we are taking another 50% hit from another government agency. If the school district doesn't think that program is worth funding, why do we pick up the slack? And then now, instead of $650,000 budget cut, we're going to be at $690,000, or half of 77. And yes, I know you're only asking Measure Q for half, but this is one more, expenditure out of the general fund. I would advocate that this would require some serious negotiation on this. Go back down to the school. I'm sure they're going to tell you all the good things that come out of this program, but if they're not willing to finance part of it, and you can take it a step further, the residents or the beneficiaries of this program at a high school are not all Morro Bay residents. They're, children from other areas. So, why are we taking up, that would be my question, why are we taking up the slack to fund this if the school district doesn't believe it should be funded?
Ditto.
Yes, agreed.
I agree also.
I agree.
I don't agree. I have different thoughts on that, and I think we also need to think about possible increase in crime when an officer isn't allocated to the school site, and what kind of costs might come along with that. And I do think there's a quality of service component to this that we need to look at carefully before we say, no, we can't fund that $30-something thousand, especially when we're looking at such large amounts of money. That $30,000 may be relatively small compared to the benefits that the city gets. Even if those students aren't residents here, they're spending 8 hours a day or more.
It's not the benefits, though, I think we want to discuss. I think it's more who benefits from this combination of the city of Morro Bay as well as other students. And the school district has always, there's also like COPS grants, and I think Governor Brown initiated a program 2 years ago, a control local authority that school districts that have certain criteria of students can capitalize on, get grants to fund these kind of programs. I don't think it's behooves us to continue to automatically, especially after the Prop 30, and so people are seeing that on their property tax bill at, $50 per 100,000 assessed. I just don't think this is right. John, you had some questions?
So I would respectfully disagree with some of those points.
That's okay.
And just add that while the students may not live in Morro Bay, they spend a lot of time here, and that the possible benefits could be to our city, even if the students aren't actually in residence here. Mm-hmm. But I would advocate for looking for other sources of funding. I just wouldn't advocate for the city to close the door on funding that.
What wasn't mentioned, I did happen to go to the budget meeting where this was discussed. This is being phased out. So what you're really asking for is not to keep the 70, you're asking to make this 140, because what the plan is that this would stay in place through like the year or half a year until somebody retired, and then they would move that officer back to the police force. So the plan they've got, even if you leave this here, is not to keep it in place. So you need to be making a case, and I don't disagree with your arguments. I mean, all these things are good, but you're making an argument for 140,000, not 70.
Eventually.
Well,
Bart, just
basically,
based on
if somebody leaves tomorrow, what I heard was, if somebody retires from the force tomorrow, or maybe September the next school year, then this goes away right away. So that's part of the discussion, which.
Okay. John, your point?
So this is a Morro Bay city police employee who, if we reject this, then that person gets laid off? I mean, if the city does not fund it this way, then that person is going to be laid off?
Or half laid off? Or overtime?
The thought is, which I think is very reasonable, that over some amount of time, someone on the force will retire or move on and get another job. It's sort of with 25, I don't know what the staff is, but and it's probably reasonable if you look at attrition there, and they're just assuming that's going to happen. But yeah, you're right. If we keep the person on and we say we can't go over on this budget, and you can always go over a budget line item. But that's what's happening. They're just assuming that someone will retire, who may or may not. No one said, I'm going to retire in 6 months.
I mean, there is a possibility of a layoff, to be clear.
Any comments, Craig? Were you going to jump in?
No, actually, thank you, Bart, for
Okay.
Providing that additional level of analysis or presentation that was presented before City Council as well. So in a nutshell, that was the idea behind the position. It was, in my opinion, a thoughtful approach to this, certainly open for disagreement. And the earlier question of would this involve a layoff if City Council did not authorize the $77,000? Well, assuming the general fund was untouched, there would be 6 months worth of funding in the general fund to essentially fund that portion of it. So I don't have a straight answer for you without a determination on either side. So.
So I guess if any of us feel strongly we want to make a recommendation, or we would go with a 6-month recommendation and not fund it beyond that, or if we just want to let it go. And
so this item was specifically agendized about the Measure Q appropriation side, so we would just be talking about that portion of it.
Yeah.
I think I would support maintaining the $77,000 and seeing what happens.
In 6 months, basically.
So you're saying come back to it in 6 months and see where we're at?
Yes.
I would support that.
Any other thoughts, Walter? Bart?
Personally, I would sooner see it go back to City Council to see if they would go ahead and fund it from the general fund and allocate that money towards streets. I just feel that there's the need with streets is so great, and if City Council feels that they want to fund this out of the general fund, then go ahead and do that. But Measure Q is really the only avenue that we have for funding street improvements, and to me that's a higher priority.
So does somebody want to make a motion on something? No, it's just really more informational, but if there's, as we go through it, if there's something we want to make now's the time to do it before it gets into the Measure Q budget.
Yeah, if the advisory body felt strongly one way or another versus any of these, we're looking for that type of input to relay to the City Council.
So I'll make a motion that we recommend to the City Council that that item for the school resource officer be deleted from the list.
From the Measure Q. I'll second that. Okay, let's do a roll call vote, make sure we get this right. Go ahead, Dave.
Agreed. Yes.
Yes.
I would disagree on total elimination.
That was a no?
No.
Okay. Yes?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you. The rest of these were pretty, other than the pavement management, that's straightforward. Any of the others you wanted to comment on?
Not in particular. As you can see, the top section is the recurring allocations that have been kind of recurring appropriations going forward. So the last one on that list was the salary and benefits for the vacation relief firefighter to maintain those 3 full-time firefighters in every shift. Pavement management, as you mentioned. There's a couple police paying paying for the portion of the standby pay to maintain their readiness 24/7 responses to make sure if an incident were to occur in the middle of the night, something like that, we have adequate resources to take care of that. There's other $14,600, which is a payment to other agencies, and that has to do with our request for the bomb team and the Sheriff's Special Operations Unit, so the Narcotics and Gang Task Force. Flipping over on the backside of your page there on page 23, a couple of fire department requests, $4,000 for some fire hose replacement, so to replace 2,000 feet of 2.5-inch 24-year-old hose. That's, just to be clear, that's not all of the hose that we have in the fire department by any means. It's just a portion that's aged. Another request for $1,200 for a generator for a multiple casualty trailer that we have, and that generator has failed. It's a very old, I believe it's a 1994 or 5 generator, and those go out pretty quickly. There's a $17,000 and almost $500 request to repair and replace the Black Hill repeater. So that's been around for quite some time, had some operational issues, and then with the recent windstorms that actually sustained some damage. We hope to get some funding through outside means. Generally, you don't get that for storms where there's not major infrastructure damage, so that's why that request is in there. And then another one for $15,000 for a comprehensive rewrite of our Morro Bay emergency plan. What we have now is a 1999 model plan. Most jurisdictions in the state have a more up-to-date. It was either 2013 or 14, I can't remember which year, where that model was updated. The idea behind that is we're a small jurisdiction. If we need other jurisdictions to come in and assist during some kind of major event or catastrophe, they can pick up that plan and utilize it to the best and highest use without having some kind of crosswalk or issue with language or anything like that. So those are the requests.
Any comments on any of those? They appear to be pretty consistent with previous year's expenditures for Measure Q.
And the previous $399,000 on the, which was not expended on the payment last year, is going to be rolled into, so we'll have more than the 500, whatever that.
I'm not sure the 399 you're talking about.
No, I think he's talking about a carry forward for the previous year.
To 16-17 that's being expended current year.
Mm-hmm. That's already spent.
Yeah.
It's already poured.
Okay, so the 399 is gone. Is that what this is saying then?
It was spent for street work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And who's doing the rewrite? Is that city staff or that's a consultant?
No, it's there's a professional out there that does these kind of things, and that's the specialty. I looked at the total cost for doing it. It's not that much.
Okay.
For looking at all we're getting with it, our fire chief will be actively involved in that, which will save on some of those costs as well. So looking at the benefit from that incremental amount, it made sense.
It sounded like when I went on to that meeting last year, there's a grant they're working with. Is that right?
I'm not sure what was discussed last year, but this would be the $15,000 request would take care of it, so there wouldn't be any kind of outside funding.
Okay. It sounded like it was maybe a $40,000 contract for the specialist, but there was some additional funds maybe needed.
Okay, so are we in general agreement, other than the motion that we made on the one item? Dave?
Yes, I agree.
Okay, everybody agree? Okay, so that'll be recorded in the minutes and transmitted to council. Thank you. Then I think we just have, I want to make sure, PWAB meets at 5:30? Okay, we'll be done. Promise you, real quick. So we're on 6 future agenda items. And do we have any suggestions for future agenda items? Craig, what do we have so far? We're probably going to have a carryover on some of our discussion on WRF.
I'm sorry, carryover on WRF?
On the WRF discussion or anything, or
on the comments related to the
right.
Yes, we'll carry that one forward.
Okay, and then I had another request, citizens on, and we have discussed this, Craig, again, sorry to catch you off guard, prior to your arrival, the CAP review, the allocation plan and review, so maybe that ties in, especially because the biggest expenditure there is legal, but I understand it hasn't been done for over 10 years, and that may be something that at some point we would have to look at.
So it's a 2009-2010 plan when that professional study was done.
Okay.
Based on some minor, without getting into this because we didn't agendize the discussion,
Yeah, right.
We do some little incremental changes based on known factors that would have made those adjustments, or some minor adjustments going forward, such as a CPI inflator. That is on the list of things I'd like to do, is do a comprehensive update of that cost allocation plan.
Right. So can we
that's
put
where
that
that
on a
is.
future agenda item if we don't do it next month, or when you think it would be appropriate
Sure.
after? Okay.
I have a question on the water rate comments, the water rate study
okay.
comments. As a future agenda item, what are we looking for in terms of an outcome there? And the comments are great. Are we just going to accept them all and then just forward them on, or do we want to have some discussion and highlight a couple of ones for which we have agreement, have some consensus around and feel should be priorities?
I don't think we want to just pass them all along, because there's some that are conflicting, so that would be, so we need more time to discuss them, maybe come to agreement on some of the major points, summarize that, and then pass it on. But I wanted it recorded so you could see the benefit of everybody else's comments in the event that we're asked to comment on that rates. We may not be asked to comment again, but if we are, we certainly would like to agree on what our points are and summarize them.
Thank you.
Okay, I think. Okay, so any closing comments? John, please.
Yes, I have a request, Madam Chairperson, for a couple meetings ago there was a request or a question that came from one of the committee members in regards to, are there some resources that are available for us to understand governmental accounting better and deeper? And I came across this publication from the Government Finance Officers Association. It's called An Elected Official's Guide, Interpreting Local Government Financial Statements, How to Avoid 25 Common Mistakes. And it's actually available from them for electronic version for $8 per copy, so it's a pretty affordable thing. I would just make a request that this be made available at city expense to each of the members of this committee. I think it would be very helpful.
Okay, and yes, we've been asking about CAFRs and asking, there's a lot of information out there, but this is a particularly good organization. So if you guys are in agreement, we'll make that request, and Craig can take it back and see if that gets approved, or if not, we will, those of us that want can buy it ourselves, I guess.
You may want to have more than just 7 copies for this committee. There may be a ban for it on City Council and the WRFCAC Finance Committee, too.
Yeah. I assume you can't get one electronic copy and send it around. Yeah, okay, it's probably copyright and everything. Okay. Anyways, yeah, Craig, whatever you think we might need, that would be fine. Thank you. All right, so I believe, are there any final public comments? Okay, thank you. Then we will adjourn this meeting. Our next meeting will be the 3rd Tuesday in June. And Craig, we go back to our regular start time, 3:30? Okay. Thank you.
So just for clarification then, that June 14th is the second Wednesday, so the third Tuesday is June 20th.
Oh, thank you. It should be the 3rd Tuesday, June 20th. Yeah.
And I need to let you know that I probably won't be able to make the June meeting. I'll be on taking some travel.
Oh, okay. All right. So what you should do, if you're not going to be there, make sure you send Craig. Is that to you, not Monique? Okay. Craig, and copy me anytime, but thanks. In case your plans changed, make sure we have a quorum.
We'll make a note in the minutes as well about that.
Okay.
Correction for the next date.
Okay. All right, adjourn till then. Thank you all.